Coming up on Theater Talk.
Did you have trouble finding the places where people would sing? They're not in typical places that we learn about in musical theater school or from other musicals.
Yeah, when I teach like a master class, it's usually me saying, who told you that? You know?
Stick a pin in the map of the desert. Build a road to the middle of the desert. Pour cement on the spot in the desert. That's Beta Tikva. Welcome to nowhere.
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins, and I want to welcome my guest co-host, Jesse Green of the New York Times.
Thank you, Susan.
Jesse.
We're here today to talk about one of the big shows of the fall, The Band's Visit. And joining us are the authors of the musical, the, shall we call you composer, lyricist, or songwriter?
You know, songwriter feels better to me.
The songwriter then, David Yazbek. And what on earth do we call you? Book writer, librettist? Not really a librettist.
No, book writer is, I think, accurate in this.
All right, the book writer, Itamar Moses. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
I have to begin by talking about what drew you to this material. It is, I think everyone will say in the reviews, and many people already said in the reviews when it was done off-Broadway earlier this year at the Atlantic Theater, what an unusual musical it is, what unusual source material it is, by which I think they mean it's really good. So let's start with that. Were you familiar with the film before anyone came to you to...
And it's 2007 Israeli film, right?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. I think both of us knew of the film, but I think this is right, that neither of us had seen it. I'd heard of it, I was aware of it, but I watched it for the first time when our producer, Oren Wolf, who had acquired the stage rights, contacted me and said he was, trying to put together a team to adapt it. So I watched it with that in mind, and I think that's true for you as well.
Yeah, it was like a gift.
So this was Oren's idea.
Yeah.
From the very beginning, Oren saw the movie years before we were on it and saw it as a stage piece, and then he saw it as a musical.
Were you surprised after you saw it that he wanted to make it into a musical, not just because of its inherent literary qualities, but also whether there was any possibility of making money off of it? He is, after all, a producer.
Yes, on the second one. I wasn't used to producers who had such a creative and sensitive heart. So it did surprise me that he thought he could make money, but it didn't surprise me that he thought it could make a really deep musical.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thought it spoke well of him that he even suggested it. I was drawn to it. First of all, there's a very organic reason for there to be music in the show, which is that there's
Well, this is a good moment to say what the play's about.
So the story of the film, and it's preserved in the musical, is about an Egyptian police orchestra that is sent to Israel to give a concert for the opening of an Arab cultural center in one of Israel's major cities. But because there's a miscommunication at the bus station, they, instead of going to the city they're supposed to go to, end up at a tiny town, village in the middle of the desert where there's no more transportation for the rest of the night, and they're stranded there. So the story is just about these Israeli locals in this desert town taking in these Egyptian musicians for one night.
You know what, General? You can stay here with us tonight if you want to.
No. You have done too much already.
Okay.
And everything that sort of transpires.
Was this a fantasy of the filmmaker in the story?
No. Is it based on a
movie,
real
yeah,
event? Yes. I don't think it's based on any real event. I think it's completely invented. I thought you meant, was it a fantasy of his to have it be a Broadway musical? And that was what I was saying no to. That was more like Oren had to approach him several. It was like converting to Judaism. He had to approach him several times. He turned away.
Although I think you were telling me that the movie in Israel is considered a beloved property.
It is. I mean, there's, the Ophir Awards, I think they're called, is the Israeli equivalent of the Oscars, and it won like 8 of them. And yeah, it was one of the biggest hits in the history of Israeli cinema.
So the fact that it's about a group of musicians, in part, makes it a possible idea for a musical, although not everything that has musicians in it should be made into a musical. I quickly add. But nevertheless, it's not something, if you see the movie or if you just read the story and outline, that screams Broadway musical or even really off-Broadway musical. So
it doesn't scream anything.
it doesn't
Right.
scream anything, exactly. So was there ever any thought, whether from within you or pressure from anywhere else, to expand the sort of range of volume of the material?
When we first spoke, we kind of agreed that neither of us wanted to do that. Like the concept of expanding the volume of it wasn't interesting to us. What interested me about the movie was that it was one of those movies that had a bigger impact on me than something that was louder and more violent, because it drew me into this world, and that's what we wanted the show to do as well. Of course, as soon as you have songs, you're doing something different, but what I think you're doing is something you can do in a movie that's harder to do on stage if it's not a musical, which is draw someone into a character that it might be a close-up in the movie, it might be something small about a gesture or facial expression, and a song can sort of bring you close to a character's emotion.
Did you conceive it initially to be in a small house like the Atlantic Theater where it began?
As soon as anybody starts thinking about Broadway, as opposed to about the best production of this show, which the first production was off-Broadway, we'd be in trouble. And I remember saying, if we can make this perfect for the small theater, we're not going to have to worry about Broadway. If people respond to it emotionally, that'll take care of itself.
I want to go back, though, to the apparent cue from the fact that they are musicians for making it into a musical. In the end, very little of the music in the musical is tied into the performance by the musicians. I mean, there's instrumental music and scene changes and things like that are very powerful and convey a lot of information, but most of the singing has been created for characters not in their position as musicians. And as you say, in order to provide the equivalence of close-ups and emotional moments on stage, most of the songs are written for the characters per se.
Yes. What I would say, to get more specific than simply the fact that there is a band in the show, that's the most literal sort of surface level on which it lends itself to being in a musical. But actually, I think what I mean is more that that's the window into the fact that music is one of the central metaphors of the piece. Yes, we have live musicians on stage literally playing music very well, but what I was drawn to when I watched the movie and why I thought Oren might be onto something was that the way in which music and musicians and conversations about music are so endemic to the story, they're using, it's one of the main currencies with which the people transact with one another. It's one of the things they bond over. It's a language that transcends speech.
Well, so for example, the plot, aside from the situation you described, involves, among other things, the leader of the Egyptian band orchestra, Tufik, or Tofik. How do you pronounce the name?
Tofik.
Yeah, I think the Arab pronunciation is more Tofik, but then the Israelis say Tufik.
Who's Tony Shalhoub?
Played by Tony Shalhoub, yes.
Who is put up for the evening by one of the Israeli residents, a character named Dina, who's played by Katrina Lenk. And it becomes clear pretty quickly that there's some kind of potential romantic interest, which the musical is going to explore, not in the way that you usually expect such interest to get explored in a musical. So as you're waiting for that to happen, you realize that music is serving the function of dramatizing things that they cannot in fact say to each other. In the subplots, the same kind of things happen. People who either don't have a language to speak to each other very well, since the Egyptians don't speak Hebrew, they speak English, and the Israelis speak English, but neither of them all that well. Music becomes the way in which they communicate.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that attracted me to it. The movie, of course, happens in those same three languages, but there's subtitles. And when I watched it, I thought, what a great sort of theatrical game to play with the audience, where when the Israelis are speaking amongst themselves, they'll mostly speak Hebrew. When the Egyptians are speaking amongst themselves, they'll mostly speak Arabic. But the shared language is English. So that would force me as a writer to make sure that all of the most important conversations that take place are the cross-cultural ones, and that when something is in a language that much of the audience might not understand, there's enough sort of context that we don't really need to understand it. So
there's another thing in terms of connecting with the audience. When you have these Hebrew speakers, these Arab speakers speaking in English, and it's sort of halting, you get this little bit of tension, because you can put yourself in their shoes. But when they start singing, you feel so close to them, because you have the music is connecting an audience member with the character. And then you get this sense of a universal connection, audience and the people on stage.
And that was something that it was in our very first conversation about it, that like the reason to make it a musical was that you could drill down into and explore the sort of vast spaces inside of these people.
But even so, did you have trouble finding the places where people would sing? They're not in typical places that we learn about in musical theater school or
Right.
from other musicals.
Yeah, when I teach like a master class,
You teach
all-
a master class?
well, when I do, like at BMI,
Oh.
or when I go to a college and teach or something like that, it's usually me saying, who told you that? Like what you're saying. So, but in this show, it was kind of a subtractive process. In other words, I hit a lot of walls. We all did. I mean, we sort of
Mostly
like,
you,
but mostly me, yeah, as usual. Literally songs that just, I don't know why I even tried. Like why do I have this character singing? Well, because we thought it might work.
So you wrote a lot of songs that didn't come into the show?
Yeah, I always
Yeah,
do.
you always do.
But with this show, with how sort of different this show is, I learned lessons fairly quickly.
As a specific example, this character of Tofik, who carries with him a burden that we don't quite understand for most of the show, but it's clearly a powerful sense of grief or loss. He is the main male character and the other half of the romantic center of the piece, and yet for the longest time he sings not a word. And then when he does, we don't understand it because it's in Arabic. And he never, to my knowledge, sings in English.
Never.
Yeah, that's true.
So, did you fiddle with that? Were you thinking, we need to give him a song in
Yes.
English so that the audience will understand what he's going
I
through?
think I wrote 3 songs that I threw away. I mean, I wrote songs for him to describe what he's feeling as he's looking at this woman who clearly is getting something moving in him that has been asleep for a long time. Pretty good songs, too. Sort of moving songs that came from my heart. But
Do you remember the names of any of them?
one was called
Look at her.
Look at Her.
There might have been too much Look at Her. I mean, the fact that he isn't singing in English is so powerful because you're getting
That's
from
that's what we came
Yeah.
to.
We
arrived at.
This is a quiet character who holds a lot of life inside him, joy,
Yeah.
pain, like a lot of history, and having it come out in a silent, Miles Davis, in a silent way, a cappella in Arabic is so much more effective than all of those songs put together.
And you contrast it with the big, younger, sexy, more sexually aggressive man
Right.
who would be more like singing "Look at Her." I mean, the fact that there's the contrast between the way two men
So
approach
in one of the subplots, one of the members of the orchestra helps a nudnik Israeli guy who doesn't even know how to
Based
talk
on
to a
Itamar.
woman. Oh, is this autobiographical?
No.
You're not Israeli.
Thanks, David.
Or your parents are.
My parents are Israeli, yeah.
This Egyptian musician helps him figure out how to approach this girl that he's interested in.
Yeah.
And there we get the kind of song that we cannot get from the other character.
Yeah, as David said, we tried a few songs in the show for Tufik, solos, but the conclusion we were forced to come to was that this is a guy who's frozen. There's a wall in him at the beginning of the show, and the journey is towards maybe the very first cracks appearing in that wall by the end because of the journey he goes on. And so there was no conclusion we could reach other than the version of Tufik who could sing a big solo about his feelings in the middle of the show wouldn't need to go on the journey that the show is taking him on. And that paradox sort of left us in a place where we had to hold back his singing for as long as possible.
And yet you were never tempted to have him break through so completely that by the end he had a dance number and they waltzed off into the Negev sun.
If you ever saw Tony Shalhoub tap dance, you'd see that we were tempted, but
Very tempted.
we had to let it go.
Let's talk a minute. Itamar, you can take a break.
Sure.
David, let's talk a minute about the music itself. How careful were you in your planning and thinking about the show to create a realistic Egyptian/Israeli sound world?
You know, I'm very not careful about almost everything that I do. But in this case, I did what I always do, which is I can become interested in something and then I'm immersed in it. So I listen to a lot of classical Arabic music, a lot of contemporary stuff, and I've always known that music fairly well, but I just listened and listened and listened, hoping and pretty much knowing that when I started writing, it would be there for me.
And you yourself are the child of a Lebanese father and an Israeli/Italian mother. So you
Not
have,
Israeli, but Jewish, yes.
I'm sorry, Jewish Italian mother. So you have some of those sounds around you from your childhood.
When I was young, like 7 years old, I went to Lebanon with my father for the first time. I went several times. And have a distinct memory of hearing my first taste of orchestral Arabic music. And it happened to be, because I asked the cab driver whose cab we were in, what is that music? And it was Kulthum, who's a very famous singer and still is the most beloved, almost the female Frank Sinatra in half the world.
Who you introduce most people like me who never heard of her in your musical.
Yeah, so there's a song called Omar Sharif and Kulthum. The Israeli character, the woman is singing how this music came to her from Egypt, which is not very far from Israel, as we all know, over the radio, and just opened her up to basically to culture and to beauty. And so I had this very stark sense memory of hearing that music for the first time.
But beyond the fact that you had knowledge of this music and a kind of had it in your soul in a way, you were also interested in making sure there was a certain level of authenticity insofar as bringing real musicians on stage who could perform the kind of music.
Absolutely important. I mean, also, when you listen to this music, you can't fake it. You know, there's modalities, but there's microtones, and there's just ways of playing that are very specifically what they call Oriental. That's the other name for Arabic classical music, Oriental music. They're just ways of hitting notes. There are ways of even tuning your instrument. In the same way that like a fado singer, you know, or a flamenco.
What's a fado singer?
Fado is a kind of a Portuguese flamenco almost. There's an emotional content underlying what they're doing. There's something about a lot of Arabic, I mean, it runs the gamut, but there's just something deep culturally, very universal. But in the same way that you can eat, you know, like a great Indian meal, and it'll blow your mind, and you love it, even though it's completely exotic. That's how I've always felt about
And you've got people there. You've got people there like that guy with the beard who plays the cello. Is it the cello he's playing?
Yes.
Yes. And his look there as part of the play.
Oh, it's
so
perfect.
wonderful.
Oh, we were
my
like,
God.
don't shave that beard, don't cut.
Right.
Yeah. We loved him.
Love
Garo
guys like
Yellen
that.
is his name.
Itamar, David wants to have these real authentic looking and playing musicians like piling into your story.
Yeah.
And well, but there's a lot of difficult givens
Sure.
that come with this material from a book writing point of view. You've got, how do you get that band into the story? And if the director were here, an even harder question, how do you get them onto the stage?
David Crow?
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good question for him, yeah.
It is, but I'll speak for him.
Speak for him and also for yourself.
Well, there's a
Will you
couple.
speak with his accent and with his voice?
There's a couple answers. One is that, in a way, givens, even seemingly difficult givens, are actually not a problem because formal constraints are the best thing you can have as a writer. There's nothing more paralyzing than total creative freedom. So knowing that there were certain, I need to. But the real answer to your question is we said to each other for a year 2 years. Oh, and it'll be so great. The musicians will be on stage, and so they can be scattered around, and maybe they'll play in this scene, and they can play in this transition. But we didn't actually know what was going to happen or where we were going to put them, basically until we were in, I'm going to say, previews at the Atlantic. Even in the rehearsal room at the Atlantic, we would say, and maybe they'll be, but until we got into the space, and you know, there's a turntable in the set, until
Yeah,
we had
whose idea was the turntable?
Cromer and
Cromer.
Scott Pask, the
Yeah.
set designer, we think riffing off of a lyric early in the show where Avram sings, sometimes
So
you
the
feel
lyric
like you're
came
moving
first?
moving in a circle.
It gets a huge laugh because,
because
as
of the
soon as
He's
they-
actually moving in a circle.
Yes.
But then Cromer's and Scott's, genius about it was just that concept of moving in a circle just became the way to transition from scene.
But we didn't have, a working turntable in our rehearsal room at the
Right.
Atlantic. So until we physically got into the space at the Atlantic last year and started trying to put people on stage and how we reveal the musicians for this or that transition, we were learning. It was a concept we had, but we couldn't put it into practice until we were in the space.
And the bigger stage at the Ethel Barrymore allows you to, really improve that even more.
Yeah, we have a lot more entrances for one thing. We
Yeah.
can bring people on.
And you can see the musicians better in certain scenes that. Where
Well, you
they-
can actually, even though it's a bigger theater, you can hear them better. It's the sound in the Barrymore and the sound department that we're working with is just so amazing.
I want to go back to constraints that you were talking about. Itamar, you first became known in New York, at least to me, for a play called Bach at Leipzig. At or in? At Bach at Leipzig,
Yeah.
which talk about constraints.
Right.
This was a play about the succession to the musical leadership of a famous church
Yeah.
in Leipzig, for which 6 or 7 great organists applied.
Correct.
And Bach was the third choice.
That's true.
And he does not appear in your play.
Also true.
So the title character, unless the title character is the city, does not appear in your play. It sounds like you really do appreciate giving yourself tricky problems to solve.
The gloss on that play is that it was structured like a fugue, which is kind of true, but it makes what I did sound a lot harder than it really was. That play is actually structured like a particular kind of play, a farce or a comedy of manners, and all I did was sort of structure a play that way, and then kind of point out gently within the play that there's something inherently fugue-like about certain kinds of dramatic structure. But yeah, no, in that case, I took the pillars of a real historical event, which is Bach competed with all these guys for this job, and then in the event was the third choice, which is hilarious,
Right.
but really reveals something about the perspective of history versus the perspective of the present.
So when you come to write a musical, and I think this is your second musical.
My third, actually.
Your third. So coming from the position of a playwright who can set his own traps and evade them the way he wants, into a situation of writing a book for a musical where basically you are a piece of carrion for a vulture to come and steal
Yeah,
from.
sure.
And the vulture is sitting next to you.
Yeah.
How's that feel?
It's great, counterintuitively. If book writing were the only thing that I did, I think it would become creatively frustrating to continually build up to the great emotional peaks of a story and then turn over the execution of those peaks to a composer, which is essentially what you're doing as a book writer. But as a complement to writing plays, to writing for television and the other things I do, it's just a different exercise, a different part of your brain, a different way of working with someone to think. I mean, structure is fascinating to me, dramatic structure, and book writing is more than about dialogue or writing, reasonably good dialogue or dialogue that sets up a song. It's on the deepest level simply about structure. I remember there was a whole thing about Hamilton. Oh well, should Hamilton get the Tony for best book? There's no book. Well, of course there is. There's an incredibly well-structured book. The song, the show just happens to be sung through.
Yeah.
It's
In
a
that case,
structural
the
question.
vulture ate every bone.
Right, exactly. Exactly. But so as a way, I find it, and when musicals don't work, it's so often because of errors that were made 4.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Because the deep structure wasn't sound before they started putting songs on top of it. So I find it enjoyable to be in charge of getting that stuff right.
I just want to, in the time left, talk to David for a second about this world you created musically and with your collaborators dramatically. In many ways, as I write in my New York Times profile of David, that
Is there a
appears-
profile? Quite wonderful.
Oddly
I'll
enough, it's quite an explosive bombshell, I must say.
Well, you could call it an explosive dossier on my activities.
But in any case, this is in many ways like the perfect show that you could have written for who you are, who you know, everything you've grew up to be, and everything you trained yourself to be, and everything you've learned.
It's certainly it's my fourth Broadway show. It's the most satisfying, possibly for that reason. It just fit. It was just deeply satisfying to write these songs.
And so naturally, your next at bat is something very similar.
Tootsie.
The musical version of Tootsie. There we have it. We've learned nothing whatsoever from either of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
We have David Yazbek and Itamar Moses from the band's visit.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Susan.
Only me, only you when the sun is gone.
Only me when the moon withdraws, with the world
All around me,
with the world around me. Only you. When the sun and moon and stars are gone, what's left is only you. Will you answer me?
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Dinelli Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you